My concern with the rhetoric didn't scream out to me immediately. But when it did, of course, one concern will beget another. And then sort of what quickly spiraled and became what is like now so off-putting about it is that like I tried to ignore it. I made the failed effort to just insist that I was just being way too critical. And that's so ironic, given that the concern is simply that he never says what he's talking about. It's like how I'm talking right now, and you don't know what about. It's like that. He does not define his term. Rather, he just intermittently like postulates and abandons this effort, like it just leaves it dangling. And there's no subtle conclusiveness to this. It's not like some gestaltist thing. If anything, it's the opposite. It's just to be understood. And what the title is of this very, very, very evil piece of rhetoric that obviously has zero redeeming qualities, etc., is the perils of indifference. To which I say, well, the peril of indifference is that it doesn't exist, except maybe as something that's less than the sum of its parts. But that's just what I think, anyway. And what the speaker thinks, I guess, is different than that. And the speaker is Elie Wiesel. And Elie Wiesel is a man, is a man, whatever. Well, anyway, he's dead or alive. Known most widely as the author of the Holocaust memoir, his Holocaust memoir, actually. It's titled Night. And sort of via this, that he's really known most widely as a Holocaust survivor. So via that, he's really most widely known as having suffered. That's what he's known for. He suffered. He was perhaps the Holocaust survivor, according to the Los Angeles Times, on one occasion, and the most important Jew in America on another. Maybe something coming out of Los Angeles. Heard anything about Jews running Hollywood, it's true. This is not to suggest that suffer, was all in the Holocaust was all that he did. He did much more with his life than that. I'm speaking about him now. He thereafter remained very active as a writer and college professor. He was a faculty member at Boston University. He helped oversee the initial curation of the Holocaust Memorial Museum. He was on the council that founded the Human Rights Foundation, and I've got a real problem with him. He was a U.S. Special Envoy, diplomatic envoy, more than one occasion. And Nobel Peace Prize, 1986. As his recipient profile astutely indicates, he was the world's leading spokesperson on the Holocaust. And he really has quite the resume. So, just how profound is my reverence? He started it. It's only in keeping with my reverence for something awesome, maybe better. I don't know. But his whole thing, it's human rights, right? But he really doesn't like Sophie's Choice, the 1979 novel by William Styron. It's like one of those things, more indicative than the other. It's more specific than the other. So you can stand for human rights, but that doesn't really speak volumes if you speak out, so far as lash out against literature, against thinkers, against people that are bothering to really critically examine what the social conditions and individual psychological processes are that sanction violation, and that's what Sophie's Choice is all about. Yet Wiesel takes it all the way to the New York Times editorial page, and it freaks me out deeply. And I discover this very late in the game, and it's a late game changer, and probably this is late now. Probably going to be too long too, but that's my ethos. I don't want to throw anyone off. His every word just kind of up and lost the benefit of my non-judgmentality, native or naive, whichever. And this was unfortunate for me, because then I became scrutinizing. So to quote from an article published in 2011 in the Journal of Modern Literature, and the title of this, get it, is The Theology of Nazi anti-Semitism in William Styron's Sophie's Choice. How appropriate. To quote from that, Wiesel wonders if he and some of his wartime companions have made a mistake in communicating the history of the Holocaust, which they own, obviously. The problem here is that the Holocaust has been converted into a metaphor for general suffering, and that those who seek to universalize it are de-Judifying it in the process. Well, Styron's very preemptive dismissal of exactly that exclusionist rejection is more than hinted at, and sort of best concisely stated in the following line of dialogue, quote, "As a Jew, I regard myself as an authority on anguish and suffering." And at that time, the context about which he's writing, Styron's not stereotyping, he's observing, and he's integrating that into what are the conditions that sanction violation and how does it happen, and he's not hating on anyone. That's the whole point of Sophie's Choice, is you can't hate on any of them. They don't have any choices. Furthermore, the point of Sophie's Choice is that even in the absence of choice, merely on supply and demand, everything humans have to deal with or deal in, suffering is an economy, and it's built on status, and it's built on hierarchy, and in real life, what a top to be lonely at, that Elie Wiesel was at the top of that hierarchy, and what a rarefied situation. So that's some situation, and it is in that situation and from that apex that on the evening of April 12th, 1999, a young Jewish boy from a small town in the Carpathian Mountains addressed an audience of members of Congress, ambassadors, religious leaders, historians, human rights activists, and so many other concerned citizens at the White House. The event was broadcast to millions of people around the world via satellite and the internet. A special thanks to Sun Microsystems. It's from the archived Clinton White House website. The Clinton White House hosted a sort of a lecture and presentation series in the years 1998, 99, and 2000, which are known collectively as Millennial Evenings. And each of these evenings featured, one or more distinguished speakers, maybe a panel or a jazz band, which I picked the week before or the evening before, on a topic of major significance to American history and in the past century. And this was an initiative undertaken and overseen by Hillary Clinton, and no doubt she does really want everyone to know that this was not some conniving, opportunistic maneuver to conveniently have Elie Wiesel come over and endorse the NATO resolution to intervene in Kosovo. She never could have imagined that. So it was more than a year ago that she asked Eli if he'd be willing to participate. And to be quite fair, this is more likely true than not, given the significance of the exact date, April 12th, about the Kosovo War had just began away in February 1998. I believe her. Rather than that, he's just there to talk about the Holocaust, about himself as the spokesperson for the Holocaust. 6 million Jews, 11 million others, miscellaneous. But who'd be counting?
It's 1 o'clock.
Don't think that no one's counting. Don't think it's not some great debate, who got to die in the Holocaust with a capital H, and who didn't, who had that birthright. Get to this, it becomes perverse. So, on that note, 54 years prior to the day, April 12th, 1945, was the anniversary of the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Round of applause. On that very same day, this young boy was a prisoner at the Nazi labor camp called Buchenwald when it was overtaken and liberated by American forces. Wiesel next quite literally runs down a checklist of the most noteworthy instances of 20th century political conflict / humanitarian crises, accumulating with, on a different level, of course, Auschwitz and Treblinka. But like right before that, it had been Hiroshima, which, to be fair, that did get leveled, so I guess that's different. He then posits indifference as a strange and unnatural state in which the lines blur between light and darkness, dusk and dawn, crime and punishment, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. He is so binary and coded. Not just here, that's how he is managing. And he dares not to look upon any blinding shade of gray that might throw that out of the way. And this cognitive model, in fact, turns out, is what is at the core of Kabbalah, which he practiced. And it is very recognizable to me in that it's the cognitive model at the core of delusion of reference, which I have experience with. Maybe it takes one, but I know that. Wiesel's general purpose is to convince, or maybe to reinforce, depending on which member of the audience, which is vast, as stated. Specifically, he seeks to equalize the burden of responsibility on bystanders and on perpetrators as sort of a unified, indifferentiable responsibility, just equal on both parties as contributing to the same atrocity. His thesis, which is stated, is that indifference is not just a sin, it is a punishment. I can get into that, but what's a sin that isn't? He just loves to keep it balanced, and it's not a rhetorical antithesis. It's a complex. He has a complex which requires this. And sometimes that doesn't apply. I'm familiar with that too. I'm just become more and more familiar with what he's saying. It's insane. Anyway, this sort of need to have diametric makes indifference a clear target. He then goes on to give a fine speech and discuss the perils of something which he refers to as indifference. It isn't. It's stigma. He gives a fine speech on the perils of stigma. And if the speech were titled The Perils of Stigma, P.S. FDR is the devil, and if he didn't insist on the portrayal of himself as a little kid, because he was old for a boy, but then in his mind, what's not old is young. As he goes on to conclude the speech with, the young Jewish boy from the Carpathian Mountains has accompanied the old man I have become. And again, it's not rhetorical antithesis. It's just what lets him persist. And that's not wrong, but it shouldn't necessarily be broadcast to millions of people via satellite and the internet, special thanks to some microsystems. It just sometimes doesn't apply. So, who is this person? What's their deal? Where'd they come from? How'd they get so suffered? Well, Elie Wiesel grew up quite pleasantly in the mountains in Romania. The threat hadn't been mounting. It was far off, somehow. Lack of RSS feed or CNN, but the danger really began when it arrived, and that was in March 1944. Soon after, he and his family and the Jewish community he knew were deported to Auschwitz, where his mother and younger sister were slaughtered upon arrival. That's really horrible. Not much better is that he and his father were then utilized in forced labor, the understanding being, of course, that when they were no longer able-bodied enough, they'd drop dead or be killed for that failure. And his father did die in the march to Buchenwald. And then, on April 12th, 1945, it was liberated, and Elie was 16 years old, a young Jewish boy. At 16, one is young, and a young male is a boy. But a young boy? That's not 16. A young boy is a child. 16 is not a child, least of all in a traditional culture where a young boy at 16 would soon be a married father. So, like, how can I possibly be so callous as to take issue with this? I agree. It does seem just too critical, but I don't agree that it is, because that is his whole ethos. That's his brand. And he's not stupid, but it's not true. I'll get into a little bit more about why exactly that matters. That distinction matters. And what's so bizarre and interesting about the whole thing is that himself, Wiesel suffered the peril of difference. He suffered the peril of differentiation, like drastic discrimination, actual speciation. The bottom line in Nazi theology and ideology was that the Jewish people, as a race, were spiritually diseased, in that, like, the presence wasn't permissible because it was just by proxy corruptive to the souls of human beings, who were those people whose souls had received Christ, and that the Jewish soul was unable to do this by hereditary defect. And the Jewish people as a race were a race of primates, an organic toxin, this inevitable evolutionary byproduct on the way to perfection. Either they go or we're all stuck at their level, like of mice and men. And it's not like it fell. The Holocaust didn't fall out of the sky. The Third Reich didn't fall out of the sky. It happened. And how it happened is what Sophie's Choice cares about to uncover, to get to the bottom line of, and it's that he just rejects because what the main character isn't a Jew who was in Auschwitz. She's a Polish Catholic, and it's just this brilliant, like, psychopolitical analysis, and he throws the whole thing out over that. He can't see past, like, the end of his skin, like his nose, his RNA. I just don't see that as very brilliant. And anyway, it just may be that this speech is so positively regarded because, like, literally FDR is the antagonist. Like, I can't even argue that FDR wasn't an anti-Semite, like he was. But, oh, didn't FDR die on the same day that Buchenwald was liberated? Whoa, that's, like, so synchronistic. Yeah, it's like total. It's like that. Is that a coincidence? I don't know if I think that's a coincidence. Like, that's really something. And yes, that is exactly when I recognize myself again. And I recognize behind him a lifetime of magical thinking. Because the fact about the speech is that no one else, alive or dead or otherwise, gets stuck at all with any aggravated awareness of ethics or social responsibility, because for lack of differential definition, anyone may just ascribe their own attitudes and their own behaviors, as well as anyone else who isn't FDR, and describe anything anyone does, them or anyone else, just as long as it's not FDR based. That is really what comes down to the speech if you scrutinize it. You can just ascribe it to any subjectively related actual concept. These include such concepts as, like, prejudice and ignorance, stigma, as mentioned, further complicity or cowardice, conscientiousness, like, you can call someone prudent. I mean, I was just being prudent. Okay. There's intuition and instinct and intimidation, discomfort, distrust, limitation, unfamiliarity, unavailability, inability, uncertainty, prohibition and inhibition, preservation. There's the legality thing. There's, like, a legitimacy thing. There's real fear and ambiguity. But it's a difference that we should be afraid of. And that is not untrue from a linguistic standpoint, because the differential definition of a word is important when it is just a word, which is being condemned. And I selected this speech to study for the very reason that is now my discomfort with it, which is that it had my solidarity on contact. It just had me at hello, It's like, oh yeah, definitely. I made no previous efforts to distinguish indifference, what it is, what it isn't. I just went with it, this connotation. Some more like back burner arrogance combined with non-passive inaction that was definitely sure to be civilization suicide. Something. It's not that. It's not all that. It's just a psycholinguistic convenience. And that is the significant peril of it. This has been to the effect that, at least in almost April of this year, indifference sort of connotatively has evolved and expanded into use as a slur. You're indifferent. You're just indifferent. It's used to shame people. Those people who are fortunate enough to not be victimized for squandering that privilege by living well enough to not go and wreck it by caring so much about the timeless fact that atrocity is. Like, what has anyone ever done to stop it? And one final note, dehumanization. Just try not to take it so